In Oxford, scientists at Wolfson College study the subtleties of human speech and body language. Anne went there to meet the man who watches video to expose the devices used by the most effective public speakers. The results of Dr. Atkinson's studies are revealed today in his book, Our Master's Voices.
What you're actually saying in this book is that politicians use tricks to make people like me clap.
Yes, and more than that, in fact, there already is a word in the language which everybody knows for referring to it, which is claptrap. And a lot of people think that means the sort of thing politicians say, but in fact, if you look it up in the Oxford Dictionary, you find that it means a trick, device, or language designed to catch applause. And when you look at the tapes, you find that there are various things that they're doing over and over again, which occur just before the audience start to applaud. Probably the most common is a thing we call contrast or antithesis, which is probably the most common or oldest trick in the book. It involves juxtaposing two opposites, and one of the most famous ones is to be or not to be, for example. Or man is born free and everywhere is in chains. Similarly, President Kennedy's inaugural speech, the best remembered quotation from that is, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And these are, one finds used very regularly indeed. Martin Luther King, who was a completely natural and highly successful orator, always did much the same thing.
I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
So you see there, it says, "I may not get there with you," which sets up a kind of puzzle. And then he solves it in the second part, "but we as a people will get to the promised land." And it's very important, you'll notice in a lot of these sequences before applause, to use the word we, because that's the way in which you can say that you're speaking on behalf of the people that you're speaking to. And contrasts are also a very useful way of building insults aimed at your opponents. And in this next example, you'll see Michael Foot quoting from Zaza Gabor, and he's attacking David Owen with a very neat little contrast, which is also very amusing.
Men who try too hard to be macho are generally not macho, and that's what...
So in a way they go.
Are there any other type of claptraps?
One of the things we find is that a lot of bursts of applause occur immediately after a politician has said the third thing in a list of three. So I'll show an example here of Mrs. Thatcher, who is attacking the pessimists in the party, and you'll hear her saying that they underestimated three things, and the audience start to applaud after the third item.
The pessimists told us it couldn't be done. They underestimated three things: this government, you, Mr. President, and the British people.
I'll show you another one now, which is Tony Benn. And you see in this one, it's very interesting that he, in fact, times his gestures to coincide with each item in the list. And on the third item, you'll see his whole body lurching forward. And at that point, the audience start to applaud.
And they kill it secretly, privately, without debate.
I have here a famous example from George Wallace, the governor of Alabama, an early speech of his, inaugural speech, where you'll see that the audience come in immediately after the third item in the list.
I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Do politicians do it deliberately?
Well, I think that the successful ones do it instinctively, probably, although it's not altogether clear. I recently spent some time talking to one of Gary Hart's speechwriters, and in fact I spent about 5 hours talking to her, and I showed her these things, and she did not seem to have any awareness of the fact that these things worked in the way that they appear to work, even though she was writing speeches which used them. Now here's a brilliantly successful device used by the Prime Minister, which we call set 'em up and knock 'em down. And you see what she does is she outlines the opposition's position, and then having done that, she states her position by saying it's a load of rubbish, and away they go.
Unspoken assumption behind policies of withdrawal from the community and unilateral disarmament is that others will continue to bear their burdens and pick up ours as well. That others would continue to accept our products even though we refuse to accept theirs. That others would ensure the defense of Europe and provide a shield behind which we could shelter. What a contemptible policy for Britain.
Now that device is 100% successful when Mrs. Thatcher uses it. And if you want to know more about how successful the various devices I've shown you are, I suggest you go and see my colleague John Heritage at Warwick University, because he's done a large-scale statistical study and can tell you exactly how successful they are.
Right, I'll do that. John, I've heard all about these three-point lists and contrasts from Max, but I mean, do you really think they're going to work for me?
You see, the interesting thing about these devices, Anne, is that some of them are very much more successful than others. For example, the contrast is 5 times more successful than the point made by an ordinary sentence. The 3-part list is something like 3 or 4 times more successful than an ordinary sentence. And some of the devices, like the set 'em up and knock 'em down one you've just seen, that is as much as 12 times more successful than an ordinary sentence. So really, you can get results through the use of these devices if you pick the right device for the right context.
This 3-point list, are you suggesting that they'll applaud just because I've said things in 3?
Well, I think the evidence here is mixed, really. The 3-part list is a bit like an Exocet missile. When it hits, it really hits very well. But the thing is, you have to deliver it properly. A lot of people have got this tendency to let their voice drop down and let their eyes drop to the next item on the speech that they're trying to make. And in the process, they break contact with the audience. Now, if you keep your voice up and if you keep your head up as you're delivering the 3-part list and punch it out nicely, you're almost assured of success.
I mean, you've watched hundreds of these speeches. I mean, who is the most effective? Who should I be really modelling myself on?
Well, I think the first thing to say about this is that, on the whole, people who speak slowly and deliberately are very effective in getting applause and getting the message across generally. And I think of all the people who speak slowly and deliberately in making political speeches, one has to say that Margaret Thatcher is the outstanding success of modern times. One of her speeches as party leader, which I looked at, in the 45-minute speech which she gave, over 10 minutes of that time was occupied with applause. She was applauded 77 times in 35 minutes. And that's a tremendously effective rate. It's once every 4 sentences on average she was applauded. And so it's slowness, deliberation, leaving space between the sentences, and getting the message across through producing short, simple sentences is really the critical thing to do.